So we've reached phase 3, finding meaning in the midst of suffering. But when we think about finding meaning in suffering, it's important to ask ourselves the question, how do we find meaning in suffering? To begin our conversation about how we find meaning in suffering, it's helpful to look to a psychiatrist who went through some of the most suffering you can possibly imagine. The person I'm describing is the author of Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl is a Jewish psychiatrist who was in a Nazi concentration camp during World War II. Viktor's experience was as horrific as any of the other prisoners. Before the war, he and his wife were separated, and the Nazi government forced his wife to abort the first baby that they were expecting. He was separated from his parents, who were later killed, and separated from his wife. He went the entire time in the encampment not knowing if his wife was dead or alive, only to find when the Allies set the prisoners free that his wife had indeed been killed. Dr. Frankl was studying the experience of meaning before any of those experiences even happened, and so he thought through that lens and through that context as he went through suffering that hopefully is worse than anything that any of us will ever experience. So before we talk further about Frankl's conclusions, let me share just a few quotes to introduce you to his work. In Man's Search for Meaning, on page 103, he says, "There's nothing in all the world," coming from his perspective, what he experienced, "I venture to say that would so effectively help one to survive even the worst conditions as he experienced, as the knowledge that there is a meaning in one's life." He also shared, "We must never forget that we may also find meaning in life, even when confronted with a hopeless situation, when facing a fate that cannot be changed." Last but not least, he says life does not mean something vague, but something very concrete and specific. So 2 phrases in what Frankl shares that we'll come back to again. When we're facing that fate that cannot be changed, how do we experience meaning? And second of all, the knowledge that when we're seeking meaning, it can't be vague, but it needs to be concrete and real.